it appears we've started it. Here goes. Welcome to Lot 76 Cars and something a little bit different. So here's my normal Mercedes, a Mercedes 190 from 1990. But here's a bigger Benz for you today. Yes, it's a 1962 Unimog 411 Westfalia, and we'll have a walk around it and hopefully have a drive in it later. The Unimog acronym actually stands for Universal Motor Gerät. Translated from German, Gerät is actually piece of equipment. It was introduced in 1948, and in actual fact it was initially produced by Boehringer and then from 1951 under the Mercedes brands. However, the three-pointed star didn't actually appear until 1953. It was actually designed by Albert Friedrich and Heinrich Rossler just after World War II, predominantly for agricultural purposes. And like pretty much all Unimogs from then on in, it was designed to actually operate in agriculture with power takeoffs that could operate saws or even harvesting machines. With exceptionally high ground clearance and a flexible frame, which is essentially part of the suspension, its abilities off-road are pretty legendary, and if you just look on YouTube or Google for pictures of these vehicles off-road, you'll see they are immensely capable, both wading and through mud and forests. They've got absolutely incredible capability. Now traditionally there were three different cab options: an open cab, cabrio, a single cab and a double cab. Designed as a tractor, the original design didn't even include a closed cab. So the first Unimog series to be offered officially with a cab was the 401 series. However, the first cabs were made by Westfalia and then shipped to the Unimog plant in Gaggenau. Apologies to any Germans for any mispronunciation of that. The first so-called Type B cabs were relatively narrow, and as you'll see when we actually get to drive the vehicle, because of the location of the engine, there was quite a high heat build-up in the cabin itself, because the engine's underneath the cab, as you'll have the opportunity to see. So from 1957, a cab with 30% more volume was introduced. It's called the DVF, or Type B cab, and it's actually a much wider cab, as you'll be able to see here, and reminiscent of a lot of the Mercedes trucks of the late 50s and early 60s. This new cab itself has a lot in common with the 401, in actual fact based on the similar chassis. It's just essentially modified. The overall design and dimensions of this variant are actually larger. It's available, or was available, as a convertible and a hardtop, but in actual fact just 1,100 of these have actually ever been built. Let's take the opportunity to have a look around the vehicle a bit more closely. We've got the four similar size wheels and tyres, and in actual fact these are dumper truck wheels and tyres, and they're actually quite expensive to source. Now this 411 DVF is fitted with a three-way tipping body, and we'll have the opportunity a little bit later hopefully to see that in action. And at the back the vehicle's fitted with a three-point linkage to enable you to pull a plough if you need to, which is handy, isn't it? So in actual fact the tailgate can be removed, which does make it much more convenient for loading. So to allow the three-point linkage to actually rise further, in actual fact you can see part of that rear bed comes apart, and you can raise the linkage up much higher. So if you wanted to carry a plough and obviously raise it from the ground whilst it was in transit, this would give you the ability to do it. And you've got rear hydraulics to allow not just one trailer but multiple trailers to be to be towed. These vehicles have got legendary towing capacity, and certainly that allows them to do it. They were designed for this purpose. And there you've got the complete bed again, and the tailgate going onto the vehicle, and you're back where you started. Now we saw the rear hydraulics, but in actual fact, as I mentioned earlier, it's actually got front hydraulics as well. So this is a truly versatile vehicle. Now the engine here needs a special mention, because in actual fact this engine is used in a number of applications. It's the OM636, effectively a 4-cylinder, 4-stroke diesel engine, and it was actually available in Mercedes-Benz passenger cars, vans and small trucks from the late 40s. It's also powering the 1949 Mercedes-Benz W136 and even up to the W120 so-called ponton sedan. In 1958 it was succeeded in passenger cars with the OM621. Now it's got plenty of torque, but it's not the most powerful engine. Its 1767 cc engine produces anywhere up to 42 horsepower, and in actual fact it was derived from the M136 petrol engine, which shares many of the dimensions and similarities in terms of internal components. The interesting thing with this one is that besides the automotive applications, it was actually used in forklift trucks, farm tractors, combine harvesters and other special purpose vehicles. It can also be used to power electrical generators, water pumps, and a marine version of this was used extensively in boats, and in actual fact it remained in production right the way through to 1990, which is an incredible feat for any production diesel engine, I think you'll agree. So it's more than just an engine for the Unimog, it's actually got a history all of its own. Now, as you can imagine, with limited ventilation and clearly the engine that sits partway under the cab itself, this sort of cab forward design, the owner's installed some additional heat proofing under the bonnet to try and reduce that heat build up, because it does get quite hot in there. And something that wasn't actually fitted to many passenger cars of the same period is a heater, and this one's actually got a heater, so at least you can stay warm. There are also some external air vents which you can close for a bit more airflow through the cab itself. Originally many of these vehicles would have left the factory with a spare wheel fitted here, but in this instance this constrains the hydraulics and the hydraulic reservoir here to enable a lot of this external equipment to be run. The interesting thing with this is this was probably, we believe, a dealer fit option at the time back in the early 60s, but it's difficult to check that now, but that seems to be the accepted norm. Of course the fuel tank is there as well, and here's the external battery box, and there's some rearward visibility through. As you can imagine, a vehicle of this size needs some decent sized mirrors, and in actual fact you've got them here. And if we take a look under the back of the cab, we can probably see the gearbox. And I mentioned before about the chassis itself. The chassis is relatively thin, and it does allow some element of flex, which improves its off-road capability. So this is under the bed of the vehicle, so you can see again the height. And to guarantee the vehicle's turned off, there is a kill switch here as well. So it's a little bit noisy, as we're going to experience later, and you can see the vehicle in one of the tipping angles here. So this is only one, it can actually tip 3 ways. It would take quite a while to take us through, but you can see here how that ram works, that massive hydraulic ram, and you can also tip in 2 other directions as well. So it's tipping to the back now, but it can also tip to either side, which is really handy. And you can probably have a better look at the chassis here as well, and the hydraulics. And this is in full tip mode, so whatever you've got in the back is certainly coming out, isn't it? Now the hydraulics take a while to work, so apologies for not showing you the other tipping angles, but I think you've got the idea. And the vehicle, when it's running, is quite noisy, as you can see and hear. So the cab itself is relatively big compared to the standard vehicles. It's just a 2-seater cab. Interestingly, some of the switchgear, in fact some of the lighting inside the cab, were sourced from Mercedes-Benz of the same period. In fact, the interior light we believe comes from a 190 SL Roadster, which is interesting. Now pretty much you can forget door cards. You can open the doors and you can wind down the windows, and there's actually a little quarter light here as well, which you can open just to give yourself a little bit more air, because you're going to need it, because it's going to get very hot in here. So using the opportunity to get up in the cab, we can really appreciate what it's like to be in a Unimog 411 DBF. So it's a bit of a step up, so bear with me. Get into the cab, you've got a relatively rudimentary display of engine temperature, fuel and the speedo. Now I'm going to check with the owner what the other warning lights means, but it's not exactly fitted with a plethora of infotainment here. And as I referred to before, the engine is basically just there. So this middle button is the start button, and just above it the green indicates that the battery's charging and the red is oil pressure. Now when we talked earlier about heat build-up in the cabin, you can really understand why, with the engine so far back in the cabin, that you actually get so much heating. Now the owners, as I mentioned earlier, has actually added some heat proofing, and to try and reduce the noise, although it's not so easy, has added some additional matting to try and reduce that as well. So it has 6 speeds and 2 in reverse. However, the first 2 gears are just for field work and heavy pulling. They're not actually usable on the road. And pretty much when you start this off, as I've just experienced, you actually go to 3rd pretty much to start the vehicle off, and then straight into 4th almost immediately. So here is the lever to select forward or reverse. And then once you've done that, you can take off the handbrake and you can select the gears as mentioned earlier. And although this might look like another handbrake, in actual fact this actually allows you to engage the diff lock as you're moving, and in its day apparently this was one of the few vehicles that would allow you to engage the diff lock actually as you were moving. Now I mentioned earlier how to start the vehicle. In actual fact the engine kill switch is just this. It's no more rudimentary than this, which basically kills the engine. So I'm going to have the opportunity now to drive the vehicle, so let's get in and see whether I can remember what I've been told about starting it. Let's hope so. So it's quite a way up into the cab, as I mentioned before. Try not to hit my head on the way in. Let's see whether I can remember how to start it. So make sure the vehicle's out of gear. Okay. So just pull this. And it appears we've started it. Here goes. This is really the terrain for which Unimogs were built. But once you get moving in these vehicles, as I've just proven on my short test drive, it's actually easy to get the hang of, and the real surprise for me today is how light that steering is. It's actually really, really easy to steer. Again, this is not really a road vehicle. This is effectively, it's a tractor. You know, it might look like a commercial vehicle, but in actual fact, what you're looking at here is a relatively sophisticated tractor designed in the 50s and manufactured still to this day. What a fantastic vehicle. So thanks for joining me on Lot 76 Cars and my review of the Unimog 411 DVF cab Westfalia. Hopefully I've got that right. Please feel free to like, subscribe and share. If you have any comments, please add them. I'd love to hear more about your experiences with Unimog, and a fantastic opportunity for me to drive this and to get close to it. Thanks for watching.